name is Bruce Grove. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Polystream. First off, thank you to UKIE, to our sponsors, and Staffordshire University for hosting this event. My background is I'm a systems engineer by training. I did not take a traditional route into the video games industry. In fact, I took quite a weaving, torturous path to get here. I don't develop games. I don't create artwork. I don't write scripts or anything like that. I'm a platforms guy. I'm the person behind building the equipment, the hardware, the systems that we actually run games on. Long-time theme of mine is my favorite tool is actually a hammer. It's the thing I've found that translates most wherever I've been in the world. So when I was 13, I went to my careers counselor, and this is absolutely nothing like the conversation we had. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't really know what I wanted to sort of start out, set down my path. And I went to a very academic school. And so the problem was there was no vocational training. There were no real technology subjects. There were no computer programming subjects, electronics, not even metal or woodworking. And so I really didn't know what I was going to do, and nothing at the school was really gelling with where my passions lay. But thankfully, a family friend had spotted that I had spent a lot of my time playing with computers and playing with computer games, and that was my first computer games console, the old Atari 2600. The machine on the right is an Acorn Atom, for those of you that aren't familiar with it. It was actually a home-build kit that you put together yourself. I built one with a friend when I was about 10 or 11. And it was the predecessor to what became the BBC Micro, which we see today revolutionized in things like the Raspberry Pi and the recently announced BBC Microbit. So when this friend of mine, he said, look, you're really passionate about electronics, you're passionate about building things, and you don't want to stay at school studying. Why don't you look at taking an apprenticeship? Why don't you look at going to a company where they will continue your training, but they'll continue to teach you in things that you're interested in? So that was great. It had a great effect on me. It caused me to knuckle down, and I focused on what was still STEM subjects. It was the sciences, the maths, the English, and I really buckled down, worked towards those. And a byproduct of that was at the age of 16, I was offered an apprenticeship with British Aerospace. And so off I went, age of 16, I left school, I joined British Aerospace, armed with my qualifications and all of my expectations to go and work in an aircraft factory. That's how British Aerospace started. It wasn't quite like that when I got there. Looked a little bit more like that. But at the age of 16, what they'd do is I would go to college one day a week. I specialized in electronics and avionics systems. I learned how to code. I learned how to design circuit boards. And on top of that, the 4 days a week that I wasn't at college, I was in a workplace. I was in a workplace environment where they would send me to all of the different parts of the company. I spent time in the labs. I spent time on the factory floor. I worked across everything. I worked in sales. I worked in finance, in marketing, in our X-rays department. And it gave you a feel for everything that was going on. At 18, they transferred me to my new office. That there is Dunsfold Aerodrome. Dunsfold Aerodrome is the home of the Harrier jump jet. And so every day of my life, for the rest of my training and for the first part of my career, I was working with things like that. My job was working on aircraft jet engines. I worked on the avionics systems for them, the engine control systems, the fuel systems. And at that time, a lot of electronics design still, a lot of low-level coding, and really sort of getting to the groups of it. But when we were doing testing, all of our stuff was field trials. We would be out, and we would be sort of working on the runways, working on these aircraft and pulling them together. At the end of this, by the age of 20, I'd finished my apprenticeship. I was now a fully trained systems engineer. And I continued working at Dunsfold for several years. But one of the things the apprenticeship had given me wasn't just the foundations of my training. It wasn't just that I was now an engineer with this ability to wield a soldering iron and a hammer. It was that I had seen how a company worked. I had the benefit, and with hindsight, really this amazing education where I understood now why all of these bits of a company exist. Why do you have logistics? Why do you have sales? Why do you have legal departments? And as you start your career in the games industry and as you work through this, it's very important to remember that the games industry isn't just about what you see on the screen. It is about everything that goes behind it. It is everything we have, from the artwork to the voice actors to the script writers, but again, to the logistics, to the how do you do packaging, to the how do you do the legal documents, how do you license things. There are so many pieces within an organization that understanding those structures becomes very important. Dunsfold, by the way, is no longer a manufacturing facility. There's no longer planes there. Some of you know it. It is now the home of Top Gear, obviously soon to change presenters. It is also a big film studio set. For those of you that have seen Casino Royale, that's the aircraft in Miami Airport, was actually the 747 that sits on the runway at the back of Dunsfold Airport. It's still a big studio lot. It's used for a lot of film shoots now. So still a lot of cool stuff goes on there. So meanwhile, my career continued to wend its way. I left British Aerospace and I went to work for a very small jet engine test company. That was kind of my day-to-day job. And as the junior and in kind of office, one of the things you will learn, and I heard somebody mention this earlier, is do not go in thinking you're the hot shot. Go in expecting to be given the jobs that nobody else wants to do. It was quite common for me to be told to go and put on some earmuffs and go and hit the engine or hit a valve next to it whilst it's fully running up. There's an F-16 engine with 40,000 pounds of thrust on full afterburner. It's not generally a thing you want to be stood next to trying to make something work. But my job now started to cause me to travel around the world. Not surprisingly, there's aircraft all around the world. There's test facilities all around the world. And so I started to experience new places, new cultures, new countries. And I got to do a lot of traveling. This was an amazing time. I was in my early 20s. And I was just constantly on the move. Whenever I landed, I was basically handed a ticket to go somewhere new. That's actually a bus in Pakistan. And when you start to travel around all of these different places, you see just the most amazing sights and you get the most amazing experiences. This is the New Mexico desert. In New Mexico, there's actually a lot of airfields and test facilities out there with a lot of test flights that go on. And so these were the kinds of environments I was being sent to all around the world. Some of them weren't quite so nice. This was actually one in Northern Europe. It's a not very nice place. It's very cold in the middle of winter, and you do not want to spend 2 weeks stuck on an airfield in the middle of winter in Northern Europe. However, it's all part of the experience. It's part of learning. It sort of shapes you. It grows you. And for me, it was just one of those amazing things that I got to continue to do. But one of the other things that was amazing about it was as I traveled around the world, I got to meet all of these people, experience all of these new cultures, experience all of these new ways of not just the fact that it was a different environment, but people have different ways of doing things. People have different ways of approaching things. I've seen foundations to big test facilities dug with JCBs and diggers. And equally, I've seen them dug with shovels and donkeys. And both work just as well, I can promise you. It is amazing how much earth you can move if you've got enough shovels and enough donkeys. And in some places, that's a very effective way of sustaining the local environment and sustaining the local villages. So I've seen that done, even for the most modern technologies. And what it teaches you is there's no one way to do things. Always keep thinking about that. Keep thinking about the fact that you can always come up with new approaches and you'll learn things as you go along and new techniques and new ways of doing things. So by the age of 25, I had been very privileged to travel all around the world. I had worked on all kinds of amazing aircraft. This is a small fraction of the things I'd worked on. And it was an interesting time because in the mid-90s, the UK aircraft industry had started to go into a little bit of decline. A lot of the big jobs were going over to Europe. A lot were going out to the US. But it was also just as mobile phones were coming into play. We were seeing a huge boom in the telco industry. And so we were seeing a whole new technology emerging just as one technology was sort of going down. And my foundations in systems engineering were specialized somewhat in avionics, but at the same time, they were very transferable. But the other thing that turned out to be very, very transferable was my experiences from traveling, my experiences with working all around the world. And that turns out to be something that kind of accelerates your career. It really gives you a way of sort of saying, I have done so much more because I haven't just done what I did in this one place. I've done it in all of these different places, and I've had to adapt. I've had to figure out other problems. And so I went to work for a small telecoms company based in Slough. Now, that's not as exciting to look at as Harrier doing a vertical takeoff. However, the technology behind it at the time was every bit as complicated. And this was the technology that was moving the bits as we started our broadband revolutions, as we started to really think about using the internet and growing what it is that we're going to build out on. So my company, a small company, was acquired by a very large US company called Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems was based in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so all of a sudden, I found I was in airports again, and I was being asked to go out to Silicon Valley to meet and work with the teams over there and the engineering teams over there. Silicon Valley is it's incredible. If you have had the opportunity to go to California, you'll know that it's sunny, it's warm. But Silicon Valley as a place to work is this melting pot of people from all over the world that have come in because you've got the most amazing technology companies there. And just everybody just working to try and build the next coolest thing. Everyone's doing a startup. Everyone's working for Google. Everyone's working for Facebook. It's just, there's so much going on there, it makes your head spin. And one of the things that going to Silicon Valley reminded me was never stop learning. Surround yourself by people that are smarter than you. You might want to be the smartest person in the room, but if you're the smartest person in the room, the chances are you're not learning. So always go seeking out people that you can learn from. Look for mentors. Look for people that can help grow you and build you for what you're doing. And also, if you can absolutely build out a team filled with smarter people than you, as someone once said to me, that makes you a really good manager. So at the age of 30, I was offered a job. So I moved to California, and I moved out to Silicon Valley. And it's really hard to say, why would I go to Silicon Valley? Because this is kind of the scenery that's on your doorstep there. That's California. That's the kind of place. Those are the kinds of opportunities that get handed to you. When I moved out to Silicon Valley, funnily enough, Sun then acquired a company. Acquired parts of a company called VMware. And so they asked me to head up that team. That team was in another country. And so 3 months after moving out to Silicon Valley, I was asked to head up this team in a place called Watford. I guess it was my language skills. However, I was still out in Silicon Valley. I was now heading up teams that were based all around the world, and I had to start to go to new places again. I took my first trip out to the Far East Asia, and I went to Korea, where, again, one of the things I was struck by was the difference in culture, the difference in how you do business. When you go to somewhere like Japan, Korea, China, it's how you dress. It's how you present your business cards. It's how you formally address people. All of those things matter. And your cultural approach sets up your business and how you're going to do things. This is us in the UK in formal games business attire. I can promise you when you go out to Japan and you meet with a games company in Japan, don't be surprised if people expect you, depending on what you're doing, to wear a suit. If you're going out to meet with companies that aren't games companies especially, that's going to be a black suit and a white shirt. End of story. That's how you do it. But you learn that. So I went from Sun, I joined another small company, a startup. It was called Tell Me. Tell Me was a voice recognition system, voice recognition systems company. Very cool. Silicon Valley, classic, big open plan offices, beanbags everywhere, whole lot of fun to work with. It got acquired by Microsoft. And you will now know that technology. You'll have heard people refer to it. It's Cortana. The company that was Tell Me got acquired. All of that voice tech got taken in, and over the course of several years is now what you see when you're doing your Xbox Live, when you're doing your car, when you're doing your phone. That was the foundations for what is today Cortana. Very cool place to work. But I left that company. I didn't go to work for Microsoft. Instead, I got a phone call. And that phone call was from the guy who hired me to the company in Slough. And he, in fact, had now moved to Austin in Texas and was working for, again, a very large company over there. And he knew I was a systems guy. He knew my skills because we'd obviously worked together for a long time. But he also knew I was a passionate gamer. I was still building my own gaming rigs. I was still very much sort of in the heart and playing video games. It had always been a big part of what I did on the side. And so he said, come out, come work for me. He said, I work for this big company. We build lots of boxes, but we're trying to build a startup within the company. We want to do something really cool and really show the world that we're not grey. And so he needed someone to build a startup within that giant company. Well, that company was Dell, and that was the foundation of the team that created the brand that is now known as XPS. The first XPS we created was called the XPS 600, and it was a full-on gaming rig, and we created a special edition called the Renegade to prove that Dell was not a grey box company. We made 100 of these, and every single one of them was hand-painted by the same guys that paint the West Coast Choppers bikes. It was an amazing experience, and our little group that was ferreted away from the rest of the company was allowed to pretty much break every process that Dell had, and we hand-built every single one of those machines in the labs before we shipped them out. It was completely not within the Dell processes, but it proved that Dell had the desire and the real sort of want to build gaming machines. And Michael Dell, by the way, is a big, big gamer himself. He was one of the first people I know to get onto World of Warcraft, and there's nothing worse than the CEO of a Fortune 500 company walking up to your cube to start asking you questions about which quest you're going to run in that night. But for a company that was shipping hundreds of grey boxes, that was really cool. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to productize XPS. So back onto the plane. Off to China I went. China's really big. Manufacturing there is amazing. Things are on a scale like you cannot comprehend. I've been to companies where companies have plants filled with 1 million people, 1 million employees. Shanghai is a city of 25 million people. The scale is absolutely amazing. And not surprisingly, with a country that size, you obviously have a lot of different cultures within that country as you move around. But one of the things is it's an amazingly strong work ethic, and it's amazingly powerful what they can do and what they can achieve when they want to. And I've been going back and forward there for the better part of 15 years now. And one of the things that you will learn as you grow in your career, as you travel, when you experience these things versus what you see in the popular press, for example, you'll start to see how things could be misrepresented. For the most part, there are a lot of people over there working just as hard, doing just the same things that we are, but they're just doing it on a different scale because of their size. But it did mean that the next thing I'd now added to my CV was manufacturing. I was now responsible for bringing up product lines, and we turned that into a product line called the XPS 700 series. This was a mass-produced game system. That X-window design was, in fact, my design. We were in a room one day. Sounds very simple. You'll be amazed how difficult it is to come up with the right ID and the right ideas. It takes a lot of effort, and then to commercialize that with the right kind of structures to make it work. So we created this, an absolutely incredible machine. It was the fastest liquid-cooled machine on the planet at the time. It was also the first ever mass-produced liquid machine. So then we started to hear about the cloud. I had been working out in Texas, and then all of a sudden I got a call back from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, a small startup where somebody had said to me, somebody I'd worked before at the Cortana company, said, hey, do you want to combine your manufacturing with your systems, with your engineering, everything, and put that together? We're creating the next big thing in gaming. By the way, that's Lake Tahoe. That's a lenticular cloud above it. It's quite a common sight above Lake Tahoe. Quite an amazing thing to see. So back to California I went, and we built the first cloud gaming system. Nothing like this existed at the time. I was the head of engineering. We developed the servers. We designed the controller. We designed the micro console. This was the first productized cloud gaming streaming company. Ahead of its time, a lot of challenges, a lot to get through to make that happen, but we actually did it. And 2 years later, after launching in the US, we launched in Europe, and we had an amazing event in Earl's Court, where we had many, many, many thousands of people come through the doors, and it gave me an opportunity to come back to the UK. So I moved back to take on a new role to head up business development. I became the first head of OnLive in Europe. So I was the person now taking on, from my background as simply a systems engineer, I was now head of all of business operations of Europe. And that was exciting times. A lot happened in the next few years, particularly with OnLive. It was a startup. It went through a lot of challenges. You learn a lot from when you go through a startup with a lot of challenges, I can promise you. But in the beginning of this year, we sold OnLive to Sony. And so for me, it was time to start a new adventure, time to look at something new. So at the age of 45 3/4, I am now a CEO. I say I'm a CEO. It's a small company. We're a startup of 4 people, which means I am also the head of finance, the head of marketing, head of PR. I am the tea boy. I'm the sandwich maker. But we've got a very cool product. We think we're going to build something amazing, and it's a whole new road. But that road started all the way back from my career, discussion with the career counselor. But one of the things about it was, I'm in games now, and I plan to stay in games. I did not take a traditional route to get here. But there's so many things to do in games. There is so much opportunity, and there are so many parts that make up the games ecosystem that never think that this is all just about getting into a game studio, or this is all about getting into that producer. There are huge opportunities out there. The world is now massive, and we're doing this everywhere. Games itself is the mobile telephones of the 90s. It is the aircraft of the 50s. This is the thing that is going to keep growing. When we look at esports, when we look at streaming, when we look at all of the technologies, we look at VR, we look at AR, and we look at just games as a massive part of our lives now that we are all going to grow up with. Just remember that the skills you're learning today and everything you're doing are going to be fully transferable and set you up for the future. I'm here in games now. I don't plan to leave. It's the most fun I've had since working on aircraft. It's an amazing industry, and I absolutely love it. And I would recommend all of you to stay very focused on getting into it, because it's only going to get better. Build your foundations. Don't stop learning, and keep thinking about what you need to do to get to the next step. What do you need to keep taking on, and what do you need to do? Who do you need to find? Who do you need your mentors? Don't burn bridges. A lot of my jobs have come from knowing people I have worked with in the past. Be good to people. Be good to people you work with, and work with people that you want to work with. You've got lots of choices as you get older and as you grow, but you will find that you come across the same people time after time. So when you burn bridges, that doesn't help you. When you make friends, when you make those relationships, they will serve you up for a lifetime. It's a global economy, it's a global marketplace, and everything you're doing has the potential to go global. If you get the opportunity to travel, I can't emphasize this enough. Take it. Work with your company, go travel with your company. A week in another country will give you more experience than a month in this one. You already know how this works. Take the opportunity to travel. Have fun. Always have fun. Okay, and that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you.